So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Importance of Learning Asian Languages, a webinar that has been organised by the University of Melbourne's Asia Institute in honour of our latest edition of the Melbourne Asia Review. My name is Scarlett Barnett. I'm a part of the Asia Institute team, and we would like to acknowledge that this event is being held on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to elders past and present, and I'd like to extend that acknowledgement and that respect to any First Nations people who may be joining us today or watching on the replay. I'm joined today by four incredibly talented and engaged professionals in the field of language education. We have Hamish Curry, who is the Executive Director of the Asia Education Foundation at AsiaLink, and that's within the University of Melbourne. We have Kate McGregor, an Associate Professor in Southeast Asian History, Historical and Philosophical Studies, and also the Deputy Associate Dean International for Indonesia within the Faculty of Arts. Kate is also the President of the Asian Studies Association of Australia. We have Ikuko Nakane, Associate Professor in Japanese Studies with the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne, and Ikuko is also a co-author of one of our publications in the current edition of the Melbourne Asia Review. And lastly, I'm joined by Sabrina Lee, who is a Chinese language teacher and the International Students Coordinator at St. Margaret's and Berwick Grammar School. So thank you all for joining us. I'll pass over now to Hamish, who will introduce the topic and lead us into the discussion. Thank you, Hamish.
Thank you very much, Scarlett. And thank you again to the Asia Institute for pulling this event together. I think we could all say that this event comes at a very fortuitous time in how we understand the world around us and the context for Australia as part of Asia. Given some of the recent news, we might, forgive Australia for starting to look at our relationships with Western countries, but of course our home has always been in the Asia Pacific, and our society reflects that home too, and increasingly so in the way it influences education across schools and universities and other tertiary institutions. I think one of the things that really sets the tone for understanding the importance of learning Asian languages is actually thinking about the recent Alice Springs or Mbandwa Education Declaration that was signed by all education ministers in 2019. And in it, it described the importance for our young people in Australia to be informed and responsible local members of the community who value and celebrate cultural and linguistic differences and engage in the global community, particularly with our neighbours in the Indo-Pacific region. And so there's at least some language that goes to this heart for the next 10 years, which is what each education declaration is set for, in suggesting that our young people need to be engaged and need to understand the world and the societies that we are part of. And this goes to the heart of Asian languages. We also know at the moment that the Australian Federation of Modern Language Teachers Association of Australia has been funded to do a national piece of research on looking at the take-up of languages in schools in Australia and the impact of that across many different respects. The results of that study are due out, I think, next year. And of course, an opportunity again to look at what it means to how we engage young people in second languages. And also perhaps closer to home for us at the Asia Education Foundation, we are into also the final phase of a rationale on why Indonesia matters in our schools. And it's something, again, in terms of looking at languages such as Indonesian, which has struggled probably more so in recent times in both schools and at tertiary level. We need to ask these questions about why it's important and why we have Asian languages in our schools and being spoken by people across different sectors. We have very limited data, and that's probably one of the challenges to also bear in mind when hearing from our panelists. There is data that we have perhaps from OCARA and looking at just year 12s completing with speaking a language other than English. And it's for the last 10 years, it's sat at around 10 or 11%. So it's never really gone up or down, but we have seen variation in some of the languages. It's probably pleasing to know that Japanese and Chinese are the two most popular languages or most common languages studied up to year 12. but we're still only talking about 4,500 students in each of those categories who are able to speak or have at least studied one of those languages. And so that's also probably a figure we could probably say whether we feel that's enough, and also what are the opportunities and benefits. So it's wonderful to have these three wonderful people here to talk us more about these opportunities and these challenges. But I thought to kick off this discussion with the three of you, I thought we'd actually address upfront some of the challenges, because I think if we're really going to get to the heart of the importance of Asian languages, then we need to understand too, what are some of the biggest barriers that we might be coming up against at the moment. So I'm going to come to three of you now and get you just to highlight perhaps what are the two biggest challenges you'd identify within your current landscape. So perhaps if we could come to, perhaps Sabrina, you popped up first. So do you mind if we come to you? Like what at the moment for you are the two biggest challenges you're finding within your work you're doing?
I think because I'm a secondary school teacher, I feel it's really hard to keep students engaged and continue to learn Chinese after year 10. So I think everybody, because I was in boys' school, so all the boys are very motivated, engaged from year 7 to year 9. Then when things are getting harder and when they try to choose a VC subject, everybody tend to like to drop languages. Because they think take more time and hard to get in high school. I think that's one of the challenges. I think the second one probably is because COVID, we cannot really take students literally go to China or go to those Asian countries to have a real experience. That actually sort of stand on the way of us how we try to engage them more.
Thanks, Sabrina. Actually, that's picked up on some things we're going to talk about later about the role of choice, and also obviously without the opportunity for travel at the moment, then the elevated role of technology and other channels, which I know you've been involved in. Ikuko, if I could come to you, what are some of the biggest challenges you see at the moment in this sector?
I think there are two things really for me. One is really the structural and systematic problem of not being able to provide really good pathway to students in our education sectors. And in a tertiary education, of course, programs have recently been cut or reduced. And yeah, in that sense, I think it is really difficult to, I mean, also, just the point that Sabrina has raised, that, the pathway from secondary school, those post-VC in the Victoria's situation, students come into university and take up the languages that they've picked up at school. We just would like to bring them all up to a very high proficiency level. And then their passion is there in many cases, but sometimes they can't pick up subjects anymore because of the program they're doing. There's institutional barriers there. And so, we just would like to give them more opportunities. We've produced wonderful graduates who are multilingual in Asian languages, but we do need to do more. But the other issue is affective side of it, which is really to do with motivation. And there are people who are passionate about Asian languages and languages in general. But I think there might be a little bit of disjuncture between policymakers and decision makers and the institutions and our students' passion for languages. And I think, the research has proven that having affective or what we call integrative motivation is going to really bring out really good outcomes. And so-called pragmatic or instrumental motivation can take you somewhere that you do need real commitment, because language learning is actually, as many people know, quite hard. So that affective side can take Australia much further. I think we need to address that.
Very well said, Ikuko. I think those are particularly in the school education space too, understand that challenging role of pathways. And people talk about the cliff that happens between primary and secondary. And again, I'm sure it's become even harder then from secondary into tertiary. And I think the other point you've raised about that affective space is probably highly impacted by COVID, where I'm sure if there are guests joining us who've been involved in the new Colombo plan, that experience pre-2020 of being immersed in another country suddenly starts to bring the relevance and the opportunities for learning and the passion, the motivation for learning Asian languages. But again, I think we've also shown where technology can be a great ally in this space. Kate, given the many hats that you wear, and particularly as president of the Asian Studies Association of Australia, there must be many challenges you see. What are some of them?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I agree with a lot of comments already made by Ikuko as well. One of the first challenges, I guess, across the university sector is riding this kind of COVID storm, I call it, in terms of just seeing higher education has obviously faced significant challenges. I don't mean to neglect that in the last 2 years due to COVID, but it does seem universities have also made choices in this space with regard to where to make cuts. And unfortunately, we've seen Asian language programs particularly cut. So in the last couple of years, even in the last year that I've been president, I've had to be very active this year in writing for campaigns to try to stop these cuts. For Swinburne University, for example, they lost Chinese and Japanese. La Trobe University lost Indonesian, but University of Western Sydney also closed Indonesian in the last couple of years. And we've also had cuts to several jobs for people in Asian studies. So I feel like this is where it's where you see how much priority Asia is actually given when it comes to the crunch, when a decision has to be made between, money spent or perhaps funding also language programs for bigger reasons and strategic reasons. And because of recognition of the importance of Asia, we begin to sort of see that some universities match the rhetoric and others, when it comes to the crunch, don't, I guess. The second challenge, just broadly speaking, is probably the lack of a national strategy again to promote the learning of Asian languages. So Ikuko has really importantly raised what we should look from the student perspective, but from the top as well, we also need a strategy in terms of encouragement for language learning across all levels and signalling that Asia is important for Australia for so many reasons, because of our location, but also because of our complex population makeup. It's so important that people learn the languages that also make up the communities that make up Australia. So I feel that we have not seen much positive signalling from our government that Asia is important. Like this year, there's been a shift in terms of there was a new policy to make studying languages at university cheaper, but interestingly, it was for all languages, and also some of the wording of the funding agreements that the government signed with universities early this year dropped the mention of Asian languages being a strategic priority. So for me, I feel that there's been a reduced commitment or reduced signalling, and this goes in all government messaging, I think, about the importance of Asia. And it's incredibly important for young Australians, in my view, to know and understand this immediate region. So I fear that Australian politicians, to some extent, are sort of turning inwards when exactly at this time, for so many challenges because of rising racism, everything, that it's so important that we understand the region in which we live.
Beautifully said, Kate. And I think it does go to those challenges where, when in any crisis, our natural instinct is to be looking after ourselves. It's to be a little bit insular. We have seen this pattern across many countries, but of course, too, your real foresight needs to be the opposite. We need to have the empathy actually for others. And if I think about some of our nearest neighbours in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, in terms of the impact of the pandemic, it has been catastrophic. And I think that's something that, where those relationships really matter. And of course, we need to be able to communicate in those contexts. And as you'd all understand, speaking the language and starting to develop an understanding of how to communicate best in different contexts has all sorts of notions about respect and protocols and all those things that really matter. And I think just the other point I'm picking up from you, Kate, the region that we're in, it represents, I think, 42% of the world's economy. Like Australia's top trading partners are in Asia. By 2030, it's predicted that 60% of the world's middle class will be in this region of the world. So, it's really, when you look at the data, you kind of wonder why we are making some of the decisions we are. Even a study from the Foundation for Young Australians, going back now a few years, what was called the New Work Basics, highlighted that when they looked at 4.2 million job ads in Australia, the second thing that everyone was looking for was that candidates were bilingual in another language. So where have we gone with those sorts of signposting? Now, I think some of the challenges, and this is getting into the second sort of question, is the challenges we have in education around, should we make some things compulsory or should we provide choice? And I think this is a tension. In many primary schools in Australia, there is a compulsory notion of students learning and being taught a second language. Indonesian is relatively popular in some states, as to other languages. In Victoria, Mandarin is very popular. And again, that opportunity to start to give young children an experience of speaking a second language. The challenge then is into secondary school. If they go to a different secondary school, it may not offer that language. They may not have the kind of choices. They may not have a language at all, given and depending on where you live. So that choice also then comes into play, and something I know that you could probably speak to, Sabrina, is then into VCE, or are you going to continue it? Well, you have a choice. Do you do these subjects or do you continue a language, which we want young people to see as important? But sometimes the priorities and those choices create complexities. So I'm interested to hear from you about that, and how do we balance compulsory, like, should things be compulsory and should there be choice? And attached to that is how we keep the importance of Asian languages relevant, contemporary, and, dare I say it, fun. I know fun is always sometimes a tricky word, but I think obviously languages can be hard, as Ikuko mentioned. It can be hard to commit long-term to languages. So we need to maintain that motivation. So how might we navigate the school languages space and this compulsory choice area, and how do we start to revitalize, if you like, the sense of commitment to Asian languages? Sabrina, perhaps could you talk to some of that and some of the things that you found that work to engage students in the school that you work in?
I think we all know, like, students actually listen to their parents probably before they go to school. Once they go to school, they listen to their teachers, right? After year 5, they listen to their friends. So I think it's always good, like, to make the language compulsory at the beginning. So the students actually can listen to the teachers and follow instructions. Later on, when they're growing older, so they build a community, have a bunch of friends learning a language. They can hang out, they can go travel, they can maybe work in the same, Chinese restaurant or Indonesian cafe. So I think it's build a community. I think I feel the difficult is we have a large number of second language students who learn Chinese or Asian language, but we never get them together. For example, my students, they will never hang out with people from maybe Box Hill or Lauriston, like they never know each other. So I was thinking, we have such a small cohort of people, kids learning language, but we're not trying best to get them together. So I think that's one issue. We need to have a community who people are passionate about learning and who people are passionate about teaching it. I think this is one of the things I've been thinking of. The second is about, we go to secondary school, lots of people drop. I think one reason is probably because of language take lots of time. And when we teach, we focus on score, obviously, it's make language learning really, really boring. Because we all have to have a bigger vision. We're learning language not only for passing VCE. Hey, that's really small. So we're learning language to understand ourselves, understand other people's perspective, going compassion for the other people. So it's really different goals. So I think probably technology is better to apply for students who are mature learners, because I think a teacher can only do that much inside the classroom. But if we use platform to connect our students to the people who are in the target country, it might be a better choice, because it's kind of break the boundaries of time and space. If they can communicate and make friends, and also we build a large community as well. So I think it's kind of my idea doing teaching around. I think it's something we can work on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that would agree with you, Sabrina. I think the opportunity to develop networks and communities is that at the heart of learning a second language. We need to practice it with real people in real contexts. And I think it makes a huge difference to getting away from, you know, whenever you use the word boring, I'm sure for those teaching language, oh, I'd hate to think that, you know, it's probably one of the real challenges. Kate and Ikuko, could I perhaps get your thoughts on this? You know, do we need to make some things compulsory, or in your experience, how do you really get the uptake that you're looking for? What makes the difference in attracting people to want to stick with languages?
Okay. Yeah, there's all sorts of external, internal issues, I think. So the system needs to support continuation of languages. And I personally believe that languages should be made compulsory. Many American tertiary institutions, they make it a requirement for students to have completed secondary level language courses. So, you know, from a tertiary point of view, you know, around the world, you look at the multilingual education, Australia is really, really behind. In many countries and regions, it is actually is an essential element of being an educated person to have studied multiple languages. And for Australia in the world scene, if they want to be functioning well in the global community, then I think it's very important for us to make languages compulsory. And, you know, especially with Asian languages, we are in the region. If Australia represents itself as a member of the Asia Pacific region, then all the more we need to work on Asian languages as well. But I must say that as tertiary teachers also need to reach out to secondary sector and vice versa. And that's some of the things that the recently launched Advanced Japanese Language Education Network in Australia, and with a collaboration with New Zealand and Singapore colleagues, we are thinking of also reaching out to various different networks outside our tertiary networks. And I think that's very important. We work across sectors as well.
Fantastic to hear, Ikuko. Yes, it does remind me of those painful messages from the OECD that puts Australia second last for students who study a second language. And they're particularly looking at data from students in year 9, but we know that these things then ripple on to what people want to do in their studies and their careers. And so I think, yeah, the opportunity is to really look at ways of making it compulsory without making it feel like a punishment. That's probably the real challenge sometimes, isn't it? Maybe if we remove the score, but we give some other incentives, I'm not sure. Kate, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything said. I think just language learning has to be kept exciting. And when you get to high school, upper levels maybe, and university, that can include in-country experiences when we don't have closed borders. So for me, I think that's one of the most exciting things, but it probably has to be promoted as an opportunity better to students. But a lot of universities in the region, I know Indonesia, for example, they're now doing a lot more in-country experiences as well themselves to make things exciting. But I don't know to what extent our students know about those things, or they're promoted to them. Unfortunately, sometimes when students think of exchange, the first destination is United States again, or, you know, not Asia so much yet, but I hope in the future that might be also an attractive option for students to also do, you know, in-country study, because again, I think your language will definitely improve if you have in-country experience as well. And it can plant the seed for long-term learning of a language as well, I guess.
And I mean, I know that there's opportunities to think about how we can navigate these times using all sorts of digital mediums to try and communicate and connect, and coming to some of your thoughts too, Sabrina. But I think it's precisely in these times that we need to start thinking about the next horizon. So we need to be working now on the recovery. You know, 2023 and 2024, you know, as I've said to a few people, you know, 100 years ago when the Spanish flu was ripping through the world, I start to understand why they called it the Roaring 20s, you know, and so we're going to have our Roaring 20s. We're all going to suddenly feel a great sense of relief, but how have we laid the groundwork for that? How have we invested in the opportunities to reframe how we now connect with the world? Because now we start to see the world differently. And I think the thing that, this is probably segueing into sort of a next point of discussion, what gets me worried is that what does that pipeline look like? Not just in terms of current students learning Asian languages through high school and into tertiary, but of course, also for the pipeline of the workforce as well. There's a lot of things we need to be starting to think about, other than just saying, right, we need more kind of bums on seats. So I'm interested now to think about, coming perhaps, Kate, to your initial points about, there is a lot of worry about at the tertiary level with some language faculties that are closing. It would suggest that we feel quite worried about that future pipeline. So I'm interested perhaps let's maybe go in reverse and think about what are your feelings on that future pipeline and what might we be able to do to address it?
Right. Well, I mean, I feel like some universities at the moment have kind of made the decision that we don't need to teach, a certain language at every institution in one state. So, but for me, the problem with that is how incentivized is a student really going to be to go and study a language at another university as a sort of fill-in if it's not offered at their own university. So that's one sort of point put forward by some universities who've cut their language programs. So, well, I feel if the programs have been cut, we still have to signal where it's available for other students to study it, to keep those doors open. But for me, it's just so sad if a university closes that door, if it would mean that we have a student who could potentially graduate their degree in whatever field, but also with language, then if they come out without those skills. Because as you said, I feel like it's going to make Australian university graduates so less competitive, so less worldly on a job market, and that's so depressing. And if we need to sell the message to outside players, maybe that's the way we need to sell it as well. We might believe there are 100 reasons why it's good to study a language, particularly because of those reasons of empathy and understanding that we've just gone over before. But in terms of the outside world, it's important to say, what kind of graduates do we want? We want well-rounded graduates as universities. That's what we should be producing. And in arts faculties in particular, we're meant to produce critical thinkers who can engage well with the world. So language is crucial to that. So what can we do? I think, again, look, some universities are putting more money where their mouth is, and we should congratulate them and thank them for keeping their language programs alive. But I guess just continually signalling that this is so important for our future. And also, if we also want to continue to attract a lot of international students and be seen as truly international universities, how can we justify cutting the program? So I think we need to keep the language focused on, as most universities have sort of mission statements that indicate we want to be, globally engaged. But then again, do you match that with your rhetoric? What happens actually on your own campus? Is it actually fine for so many of our graduates to graduate without a second language? So I feel like we just have to keep coming back to the rhetoric, using the opportunities that are there in terms of the messages that do seem to get through, and using those opportunities. So, and it's really important that we keep advocating hard right now in these particularly difficult circumstances, because if programs are cut, it's very hard to get them back, I feel.
Yeah, that's a yeah, there's the punchline, Kate. Yeah. And I guess the other thing then is what might be the ripple effect down into high school education if there isn't the pathway, in the same way we see happening from primary into secondary. If there isn't the pathways, then the motivation or the sense of purpose or ease starts to really break down. Ikuko, what do you notice from your end around that pipeline in terms of students? Are you seeing it tail off? Are you seeing drive? Or how do you think it will change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really, I mean, as far as Japanese is concerned, as I have mentioned in the article in Melbourne Asia Review, surprisingly, well, I don't know surprisingly, but anyway, in the 80s and so on, when Japan had a very strong economic trend, it was like, okay, well, if you do Japanese, you get a good job or something like that. But now there is a definitely trend that just shows that a lot of our students are really interested in the language and the culture, and of course popular culture, but hugely diverse range of interests. And so, you know, it's not always sort of like doing this language because it'll be good for my career. And surely that's really also very important. And universities are also increasingly providing internship opportunities, and students are also looking for internship opportunities within their degree programs. And then I think it's quite important in a sense that we will also explore internship opportunities for our students where they can use the target language as well. And that requires, going back to Sabrina's point, that we work with the communities. And that will be quite important for us. And the other thing is that it's also two ways. So the communities also we need to actually influence the attitude of the communities about our students as second language users. And that's also quite a difficult barrier to overcome, in a sense that you are either a learner of a second language who's not fully functional in that language. But, you know, our students are trained to be good communicators and good learners. And the language learning is a lifelong undertaking for many of the students. It changes your world, it transforms you. It's not just a tool. Like, you know, if you like an analogy of a dictionary, electronic dictionary or app, you know, it changes your whole world and lifestyle. And so, you know, I think we need to work with the communities and network with the communities to create this environment where our students can be already participating and be part of the communities, and then stay with the communities and then keep expanding the network. And I think that's a really important thing to look at. And for that, we need the communities collaboration as well.
Mm. Again, you've picked up some really lovely points, Ikuko. I think, you know, and there are some lovely recurring themes coming up here about the opportunities for communities and networks. I think the role of internships is something I have heard suggested as ideas at different tertiary levels, and even thinking about what does that mean for schools, this idea of internships. I know that even the other word we could use is partnerships, something that, you know, we often do a lot through our work at AEF, which is how do we develop partnerships that start to give you that sense of grounding and relevance. And of course, that brings us to that element of two-way, which is I think the importance of reciprocity and exchange is deeply important. It cannot just be, I'm doing this just to better myself or so that I feel better about myself. So I think you've caught up on some lovely things. And the other point, I just want to pick up on what you said there, Ikuko. From my days working in the library sector, you know, it took a while for us to make sure that the literature, that reading to young children has long-term benefits for your literacy. And it seems like we had to keep reminding people that that was important. It really makes a difference to young children to read books and to be read stories to. In the same way that there's so much literature now that learning a second language has huge impacts on your own literacy and the way you see the world. I get a bit tired that we have to keep making this point as if we're trying to justify why learning a second language is important. So yes, it can be frustrating too, but I think you've reminded me that those things, there are truths out there that we just need to keep coming back to. Sabrina, if I could come to you, you know, what does that sort of pipeline look like for you in terms of, you know, teacher workforce? Like, do you see that there are going to be, do you connect with a lot of other educators in the Asian language space, or what do you pick up on from your sphere?
Actually, I feel all the language teachers are quite frustrated because when we don't see our numbers of enrollment going up. I also feel, as a language teacher, it's a lot easier to work in a school. The executive team, the leadership actually really value the language and culture. I feel if the principals, if they don't care, it's really hard getting parents and students and the staff on board. I think my school recently, we think about how to increase the number of second language learners. So we create a global citizen certificate. I think Hamish might talk to my principal already about this. So the person who can gain that certificate means you have to learn a second language. either French or Chinese, have to choose one, and you have properly to do that on VCE. It might sound like at least a little bit like a compulsory, but actually people who are really open to go work overseas or to have an internship overseas, actually is really good for them. And the students who actually have done that have achieved a great score and also have done very well in university. So I think from school perspective, have to from the top down the bottom. So the principals have been really passionate about it. So it's easier to getting kids on board.
I think too that opportunity to start to link it to other things. So how do we incentivize learning a second language? And I know, yes, the work happening at St Margaret's and Berwick Grammar around a global citizenship certificate, you know, it really starts to ground it not only just in the language, but also in global issues. And I know too that this is quite prevalent in the IB curriculum, that many schools in Australia, and many of my sense is more are converting or picking up the IB curriculum. And there's a big emphasis there on obviously international mindedness, but also the importance of learning a second language. Now, we're sort of at that point too where we have seen a lot of different comments in the chat and one or two questions coming in. So please, those who are following, you know, start to suggest questions. We'd love to pick up on some. I guess one of the things I do want to pick up from a question in the Q&A, which is a lovely reminder about sometimes the traps we can find when we talk about the importance of Asian languages, which is that we end up talking about everywhere outside Australia. You know, Australia is fortunate to be a multicultural society. The degree to which it is an intercultural society or a transcultural society is probably one that we could spend a whole nother webinar debating. But of course, there are opportunities right here. And even when we look at the school population, we know that Asian languages are already part of who we are. So for example, in Victoria, within the school sector in Victoria, the most common languages other than English spoken at home are Arabic, Vietnamese, Mandarin, and Punjabi. In New South Wales, across the schools there, the most common languages spoken at home other than English are Indian, they're not specific on whether it's Hindi or Punjabi or others, Chinese and Arabic. So those languages are part of who we are. And I guess from that question put in there, you know, what are the opportunities to draw on the multilingual communities we have right here? So perhaps would one of you like to have a go at responding to that, or what opportunities you see in that?
If I can just jump in. I mean, you know, Japanese language speaking community is fairly small, but we do actually, our students actually see and use and consume Japan all the time in Melbourne. So, you know, you can actually make community connections there. And in one case, some of our students actually, for one of their projects, they used to go to Japanese businesses, restaurants, or there is a kimono house where there's a lady, Australian lady, who sells kimono and materials. Our students would go there, try out the kimono and have a chat with the owner. And that's really a very uniquely Australian Japaneseness there happening. So someone who knows so much about Japan. She was not born in Japan. She just admires the textiles in Japan, and then she's got this business in Melbourne. And then our students would go there and then explore what she has experienced and why she ended up having a shop there. And they learn about kimono and so on and so forth, and report that in Japanese in our class. And there were hundreds of students who were doing similar tasks across Melbourne. And then that's part of our students going out to our Japanese speaking or Japanese culture communities out there in Melbourne. And then also them learning about our students and our program. And so I think there's a lot of that happening online at the moment as well. So although it is sad that we can't have face-to-face interactions at the moment, but actually the online environment has opened up opportunities for our students and people out in the community or in Japan or in Asian region to be able to come and interact with the students in the online environment, whether it's in one-on-one interviews for projects or some kind of guest lecturing. And so there are positive aspects of online environment that we ended up and it seems to be struggling all the time. But a lot of our teachers actually in a survey mentioned that they actually discovered that there are positive aspects such as this. And then the fact is that we will be living in the digital world for quite a long time now. So digital communication is authentic, it's happening, and there's more and more of it. So why not sort of embrace it in a way? However hard it is for our oldies.
Well, I think it's like languages. You can pick them up anytime. I think that sense that you're never too old, is a really important saying, particularly with languages. But I also love your example, Ikuko, because it does highlight the potential of those. We actually build not only the language, but the community connections. And that can be highly important. We start to see a relevance beyond just, well, I'll never get to Japan. And that's the perception sometimes. Or why do I need to learn Indonesian? I'm never going to Bali or something like that. Actually there's opportunities everywhere. We just haven't sometimes looked. Sabrina or Kate, have you got any examples? Oh,
sorry,
Ikuko, did you want to add one more?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean, old people include me. I am really sometimes so Zoom fatigued and I don't want to handle online stuff anymore. So that includes me. Sorry, I didn't mean to be derogatory there.
None taken. You could go. Kate, Sabrina, what opportunities do you see for accessing communities right here?
I think for students here, I'm just thinking, now we talk about STEM, like we combine all the subjects together to teach students. So now what we're trying to do is like we teach Chinese with the other subjects together. I can give you an example. What we do is nowadays we talk about entrepreneurship a lot. So we try to create an entrepreneurial project online to connect students in my classroom and another group of students in China. So they work on the same project, but they all see the project from different perspectives. How to run a not how to run a pub, but so how to run a business, how to run a salon. And you can sort of work together, and by using the language and also artificial intelligence to give you hints when you discuss with each other. I think within the time and because Margaret just mentioned the metaverse, right? We try to create a space online without physical in that country, but you can get to know the people from another country, be in that environment. So I think that's a project we can base on teaching math, science, everything, but use the media as a language, like Asian language, try to get students to do the work. So it's more like it doesn't matter how you say, it's more about the content. The language become a tool, not really about teaching grammar, teaching vocabulary. I just think I think students might be a little more by the time than the language and other skills as well.
It does remind me of what's called the content language integrated instruction, or CLIL, that is used in Europe, and I think Canada. It's quite popular. There has been a little bit of research. I think there actually is some people at Melbourne University also been looking at the potential of approaches like CLIL. In much the same way that you're talking about, Sabrina, where sometimes it comes back to the point earlier about how do we make it fun and not boring. And it's the subconscious thing of the language becomes the communication, because I really want to be able to work on this with you. I need to learn, how do I say that in your language so that we make sure we can understand one another. That creates often that, motivation, if you like. Yeah. Kate, what are your thoughts on how might we use communities locally?
Yeah, well, I guess I do not teach a language at the moment. I'm in a history program teaching a little bit of Indonesian history, but a lot of Asian history. So I'm very excited when I get students who've already done language as well, and they go on to do further study in Asian history with me. And there was one question in the chat also about students who might drop out of Asian languages at in a high school, but then go on to do, perhaps because they're very hard, and then go on to do a diploma at university. But in my classes where I'm teaching Southeast Asian history, I'm always promoting opportunities to study, well, especially Indonesian, because it's more on offer in Australia. And it's very interesting. We don't have a lot of Vietnamese programs on offer, even though, as you mentioned, Hamish, that's a major kind of outreach community. But I think learning at any level is great. I actually only started learning Indonesian at university, but I also went to night classes. I also did in-country study. So I used every opportunity that I could. And I think, so that's great. And there was another comment in the chat also saying, you know, maybe there should be a combining of university learning as well as other ways of learning. I think every medium is great, but some of the most interactive experiences are also where you do get to meet community members, like Ikuko said. I mean, in my in-country learning at such a Wantano University, then we had different members of the community come in each day and talk to us about a certain topic. And that was so stimulating as a learner, different Indonesian people from different professions in life. And then you really want to hear what they're saying. So you've got to go through vocab and get up to speed and then write an essay about it. But just those kind of real life encounters, as Ikuko said, I think is quite stimulating. But I might be an oldie like Ikuko in terms of those modes of stimulation. Maybe something more exciting like manga or something today would be more appealing, or, you know, K-pop bands, I'm not sure. But yeah, we need to get insights from young people as well. What excites them.
Yeah, really well said. Great example, Kate. I think, again, it's important for us to model, I guess, the learning too. So the opportunities when we had, and we have had some leaders and politicians who demonstrate their learning Indonesian or picking up other languages. And it you know, leadership can be exactly that, you know, lead by doing. And I think being vulnerable too is important. That, you know, languages, as has been mentioned, are a lifetime and lifelong learning commitment. So we're never going to quite get it right, but as we all know, when learning to speak a second language and then getting to use that with someone who's native in that language, that does a lot more to bridging the relationship. There's an acceptance that, you know, it's not quite right, but you're making the effort. You're showing the attention to try and communicate. And it shows a level of respect and care that I think sometimes gets lost. And I think that's a challenge in education, because we don't always create those opportunities. Perhaps we'll take one more question, and then I've got one more final question to ask all of you. But we have got one question here. Obviously, there's this correlation between, you know, what languages students want to do and the sort of what they're influenced by. So it actually comes perhaps to your last point there, Kate, around, you know, Japanese and manga. And if there's that natural connection, then yes, maybe I want to learn Japanese. And sometimes it can be the media or parents or different opinions. Do you think there's a way that we can address how languages find their, you know, their medium of appeal, or do you think it's just going to be a whole range of different approaches? What are some of the panel's thoughts?
I want to hear what Sabrina thinks, because she's teaching younger students than us. So what do you think? What appeals to younger students?
I think, you know, the problem for us is like we're teachers, right? Then we don't really do marketing well. we didn't market our language in a very trendy way. Look at our country's leaders. Like many years ago, this one leader can speak Mandarin. Suddenly it becomes quite popular, right? So I think it's about our country leader doesn't model bilingualism in a better way. They didn't make it cool. They didn't make it trendy. Then media never really pay attention to language as well. You know, I think these are all issues. Then if you look at a school executive team, not the principal, vice principal, or whoever it is in executive from language faculty, you know, it doesn't. I don't know. I just feel it's really interesting if we say those bigger pictures, because they're really powerful, because the kids getting to know them very quick. Then we talk about parents as well. You know, it's really hard. I think it's a lot more than just make language fun and engaging. I think so. Look at the big picture. The whole country have to do something and make some changes. Yeah.
Mm.
I think the problem is that we've got a very diverse range of interests, and the level of commitment also varies a lot. So that's really a difficult thing. But I think one of the things is because the thing is that there's no denying that language learning requires a lot of time, effort, and perseverance. So I think having tangible outcomes or reward, not reward in a sense of materialistic reward, but something you achieved something using the language, some tangible outcome that would be, or experience, that would be really, really important. And I think, we do probably need to do more research in that respect as well about motivation, but also about the retention. What factors are there? And then that's not just, like tertiary education here, tertiary education there. It has to be, all together. What happens for secondary students when they drop the language, and then maybe pick up on a language subject when they proceed to university, what made them continue with their language education, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so I think networking also very important. And then there are lots and lots of online resources available, and there's lots and lots of commodities circulating around the globe. So I think, we need to be, us teachers and educators also need to network and learn from each other, and then also learn from our students. That's a really big task, but yeah.
Sorry, Kate, were you wanting to jump in there as well?
Yeah, just quickly, I guess I'm coming back to Sabrina's point. It's sort of about the total surrounding discourse that's out there, also about Asia, that might come into the minds of parents, but also perhaps even, principals at schools or VCs at universities. It might also depend on how they see Asia, what translates in terms of whether they now signal that it's important for their own university. So that can flow all the way down, but even media messaging, everything that's out there. So to Elle's question in the chat, that's a very hard thing to control, but all of us, I guess, working in this field are trying to work towards, through our own work as well, I guess, promoting the importance of Asia, trying to complexify people's understandings of Asia as well through our writing. In terms of promoting like Asian language learning, we face a similar kind of issue, I guess, in history. Sometimes people say history is a kind of, that's an old discipline, why do we need to study it? But we're always sort of saying we are trying to study human actions in the past in order to better understand humanity. So it kind of comes back to this message again about humanity. Languages are part of understanding human behavior, but as Ikuko said before, we get this much deeper understanding of a society. Like people can study, for example, Asian history, but if they don't have an Asian language, they will not get the nuances, the subtlety, that backstory to really understand what is going on in society. So in order to have a deep understanding of Asia, you must have language learning. So I feel like a language gives you an opportunity to deeply connect with another culture, and better understand. Maybe you don't 100% understand, but certainly you take a step towards better understanding. So I guess the general framing would be that learning a language, even if we say for any language, brings you closer to understanding, to broader understanding of the world, but particularly for Asian cultures, which, can also be very diverse and complex as well.
Yeah, really well, very well captured there, Kate. It does remind me often of what UNESCO has often said about the role of this type of global, global competence and global citizenship. They often talk about the importance of common humanity and interconnectedness. And it's a little bit of, we learn more about ourselves by learning about others. And often the effort and the commitment, coming back to your points, Ikuko, the time and the effort and the rewards. I think also what we've talked about today about the rewards, which need to be more than just a test or a score. I think for languages, we know those rewards can be much greater, and sometimes we're not always communicating them in the right way. And sometimes there have been those things where the rewards we think are, some of those economic rewards. And we know too from some of our research a number of years ago at AEF, kids in schools don't think about the economic imperatives. It's, do I like the teacher? Am I good at it? Will I be able to, do my parents support me in that? There's many other factors that go into it. There are no silver bullets. And I think this is what makes it really complex for Australia in looking at the importance of Asian languages. It won't be necessarily something that is compulsory. There may be compulsory approaches. I see that New Zealand has just announced a range of scholarships for teachers to retrain in teaching second languages. Now, there's a national leadership move that maybe we could learn from. I see the OECD has been publishing some reports recently. There's one called How Language Learning Opens Doors that looks like another big document that builds off their PISA global competence work, where languages were seen as being really important. So there are lots of solutions out there. I think for Australia, we need to come up with these solutions that are for us. We're not going to find the answers by just following what another country does. We need to really grapple with this at our unique context ourselves. And it needs leadership. It needs cross-sector collaboration, something we don't often see in education. And it needs a better understanding, actually coming to your final points there, Kate, about understanding what do young people really want. So just to put it to you in our final couple of minutes, how would you sum up in a couple of lines, why is it important to engage and learn Asian languages? What would be your final message for us today? Who would like to kick us off?
I'll go. Okay. Well, Australia is in the Asian region, and we have multiple layers of deep ties with Asia, business or economic, but also diplomatic, and then also personal. And it's not one or the other. Sometimes they overlap as well. And then, it's an important part of our lives now. And so it's important for Australia to further their Asian language capacities. And then in the end, the language capacities mean that positive transcultural communication happens and also help us promote solidarity and compassion in our communities, not just limited within the Asian region, but where we seem to have very sad examples of divisive situations in current trend around the world. I think gives you a very strong capacity to connect and create solidarity in the communities.
Thank you, Ikuko. Very well said. Kate, Sabrina, what are your final thoughts?
Okay, for me, because my background is an international student, so I learned English as a second language. I just thinking, I feel one and second language, I'm not only really learning language, but actually I sort of complete myself as well. I understand myself better. I understand the word better. So if I look at myself, there's no regrets in putting so much time, effort in English, lots of tests, exams, homework, to turn clock, from year 7 to year 12. I think it's all worthwhile. Once I come to the country, get a job here, then working with beautiful people, having lovely students, I think it's all, it changed my whole life. I just think it provides the best opportunity and making the best version of myself.
Oh, beautifully said, Sabrina. I'm sure there's plenty of educators out there. We just need to clone Sabrina. We need lots of you.
I'm sure there are many of us.
I know. Well said. Kate.
Yeah, I guess just reflecting on the period of time in which I was trained, when it felt like there was a greater emphasis on Asia. I don't mean to look through rosy glasses back on the past, but maybe I am. I just feel now, even though in that same climate that Ikuko's mentioned, where it feels like our nation is turning inwards and a number of countries are turning inwards, it's just so important that we have this understanding of other people across the world. So Asian language learning now is just so critical to continue, especially when we have tensions with countries in the Asian region and a lot of complex issues going on in the region. We need better understanding and better relationships, and those come through learning and language and direct communication. And again, it's not just about looking out to Asia, it's also about increasing our understanding of Australians of Asian background as well in Australia.
Beautiful. Oh gosh, you've stolen my final lines. Kate. And also, it's a lovely reminder too, if you're looking for some lovely stories, recently there was the awards for the 40 under 40 Asian Australian leaders that you can find. And there was a beautiful array of wonderful young Australians who just demonstrate the kind of passion and engagement with what they do. And again, I think that's what we need. And I know that's actually some stories that all of you have brought today. My sincere thanks to all of you today for the incredible engagement and the terrain that we've had to cover in the last hour. Thank you all so much. It's been a wonderful conversation that I know we could have unpacked for hours on all the different tangents. But to Sabrina, Ikuko and Kate, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful experience and I'm sure our participants have enjoyed it, and I hope we continue this conversation. Thanks, Scarlett.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hamish, Sabrina, Ikuko and Kate. That was a truly wonderful discussion, and really, you know, there's so much more that could be said. And we do, you know, explore language learning and language literacy in Australia in the Melbourne Asia Review. So please do go ahead and have a look at the latest edition of the journal. I've just posted the link in the chat. So head over there and subscribe. We'd love to have you join our community. If you're watching this on the replay, then just Google Melbourne Asia Review, University of Melbourne, and it will come up straight away. So thank you all. The recording will be available in, you know, the next couple of days, and we look forward to hosting future events like this one in the near future. Have a lovely evening, everyone.